She stood there, holding a cracked coffee pot and a trembling smile, while the man in the tailored suit laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. Nova wasn't just being ignored. She was being mocked. Her accent, her dark skin, her job, all became his entertainment for the night. To him, she was invisible. To her, this was just another shift she had to survive. But what he didn't know was that the woman he humiliated once served someone far more powerful than him. And before the night ended, Nova's quiet words would leave the rich man in tears. For Nova, the diner wasn't just a job. It was a lifeline. Every clinking cup, every sizzle from the kitchen, every tired smile she offered was a small step toward her dream. The morning crowd came and went, and by evening she knew every face, every regular, every tip that would help pay her college tuition. Life wasn't easy, but it was honest. She took pride in that. Nova had come from a small southern town where dreams often died quietly under the weight of struggle. Her mother always told her, "Keep your head high, baby. You're worth more than the world lets you believe." Those words kept her steady, even when customers spoke down to her, or when someone mocked her accent or the color of her skin. She'd learned to swallow humiliation with a smile, not because she was weak, but because she refused to let bitterness win. To her, kindness was strength. That night, the air felt different. The diner's neon sign flickered against the dark sky as a luxury car pulled up outside. Black, polished, expensive. A man in a designer suit stepped out, his watch flashing like a statement. He wasn't from this neighborhood. His kind never was. When he entered, conversation died down for a moment. He scanned the room with casual superiority, the kind that came from money and entitlement. Nova greeted him like she greeted everyone else, with warmth and respect. But the smirk that spread across his face told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't here for coffee or pie. He was here to remind someone like her exactly where she stood. And before the night was over, he'd learn a lesson that money could never buy. The man took his seat at the counter, snapping his fingers like he was summoning a servant. Nova approached calmly, notebook in hand, her smile steady though her chest tightened. "What can I get for you tonight, sir?" she asked softly. He didn't answer at first, just stared. Then, with a smirk, he said, "Coffee. Black. Like your hands, I guess." The words dropped like poison in the quiet diner. A few nearby customers shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. They looked away, pretending not to hear, pretending it wasn't their business. Nova's smile faltered for just a moment, but she caught herself. "Yes, sir," she said, turning to pour his coffee. As she filled the cup, she could feel his gaze burning through her back. When she returned, he glanced at her name tag and said, "Nova, that's an unusual name. Sounds expensive for someone working here." She wanted to walk away, to disappear into the safety of the kitchen, but she stood her ground. "My mother named me after the stars," she replied quietly. He laughed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Stars? Honey, you'll be lucky if you can afford a light bulb in that tiny apartment of yours." The chuckles that followed, small, nervous, complicit, hurt worse than the insult. It wasn't just his words. It was the silence of those who heard them. Nova had faced ignorance before, but this was different. This man wasn't just mocking her. He was enjoying it. She kept serving him, refilling his cup when it emptied, clearing his plate when he finished. He found new ways to insult her every time she came near. Her voice, her skin, even the way she stood. It was as if her existence offended him. At one point, he called her sweetheart and snapped, "Wipe this counter again. It's filthy, just like the people they hire nowadays." The manager stood by the register, pretending to be busy, refusing to intervene. Nova's hands trembled slightly, but her eyes stayed calm. She'd been taught that dignity wasn't something others gave you. It was something you carried inside, no matter who tried to break it. When he was done eating, the man tossed a few bills on the counter, not enough to cover the check. Then he leaned in close and whispered, "Keep the change, sweetheart. You probably need it more than I do." He started to walk toward the door, smug and satisfied, when the bell above it rang, and another man entered. An older gentleman in a military jacket, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. He greeted Nova kindly, called her Miss Nova, like she mattered. As he took a seat near the window, the rich man turned and laughed. "Of course, birds of a feather." The veteran looked at him and said nothing. But Nova noticed how the older man's eyes softened toward her, like he understood exactly what had happened. Then, just as the rich man reached the door, Nova spoke. Her voice was calm, but sharp enough to slice through the noise. "Sir," she said, "you left something behind." He turned, irritated. "What now?" Nova reached under the counter and lifted the check, but she wasn't looking at the paper. She was looking straight into his eyes. What she said next would silence the entire diner and turn the night upside down. The diner went silent. Even the hum of the old refrigerator seemed to stop. Nova's voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. Calm, steady, and certain. It carried more weight than any shout ever could. "You left something behind," she repeated, holding the check between her fingers. "Your dignity." The man froze mid-step. A faint laugh escaped him, forced, nervous, but the quiet around him felt heavy, suffocating. "What did you just say to me?" he asked, his confidence faltering for the first time that night. Nova didn't blink. The rich man tried to laugh again, but his voice cracked. "You think you can talk to me like that? Do you know who I am?" Nova tilted her head slightly, her voice soft but piercing. "I don't need to know who you are. I know what you are." The man's face turned red. Embarrassment, anger, and something else he didn't want to admit. For the first time, he wasn't in control. For the first time, his wealth couldn't protect him from truth. And then, quietly, the older man at the counter spoke, his voice carrying the steady calm of authority. "You should listen to her, son," he said, setting down his mug. "That waitress you just mocked? She's the daughter of my commanding officer, the woman who saved my entire unit overseas." The color drained from the rich man's face. Gasps rippled through the room. Nova didn't move. She just looked at him, not with anger, but with something far more powerful. Pity. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. For once, the man who had insulted her was completely, utterly silent. The silence that followed felt heavier than any words could carry. The man's arrogance seemed to dissolve in the air as realization settled across his face. His smirk was gone, replaced by the hollow look of someone finally seeing himself clearly for the first time. Nova didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She simply turned back toward the counter, poured another cup of coffee for the veteran, and whispered, "Thank you for standing up when no one else would." He smiled softly and replied, "You did the hard part, Miss Nova. You stood your ground." The man remained there for a long moment, clutching his untouched wallet, his reflection staring back at him from the polished diner window. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled. I didn't know." Nova looked at him, calm, steady, unbroken. "You never wanted to know," she said. "That's the difference." He lowered his head, quietly placing a few $100 bills on the counter, not as a tip, but as an apology that words couldn't cover, and walked out into the cold night, smaller than when he'd entered. The next morning, Nova's story spread quietly through the town, not because she shouted it, but because those who witnessed it couldn't forget the way she carried herself, the way truth silenced cruelty. Weeks later, the man returned. This time, he waited patiently in line like everyone else. When Nova served him, he thanked her, not for the coffee, but for the lesson. That night, as Nova locked up the diner, she thought about how many others like her faced the same humiliation every day, unseen and unheard. She realized her small act of courage had done more than defend her dignity. It had forced someone to see the humanity they'd tried to overlook. Because racism doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers through everyday moments, testing who we choose to be. Nova's words that night didn't just humble a rich man. They reminded everyone listening that respect is earned not by wealth, but by character. And maybe the real question isn't what he learned that night. It's what we'll do the next time we see someone being treated like Nova was. Don't miss more powerful real-life stories. Hit subscribe now.